Everybody should be reasonably energized now for 1 hour of finance, okay? I know it's not everybody's bag, but we're sort of in an ever-changing world. There's a lot of uncertainty out there about finance. The sort of golden age seems to be over of the streamers. And what we said we'd do today is understand how animation is financed, demystify funding models, and find out how best to maximize investment potential. So that's the sort of the sub-theme of our panel today. Got a great panel, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I have Gary Timpson here, Catherine Branscome, Elaine Gill, and Conor Harrington. And I'm going to kick off with Conor, and we'll work back, and they can introduce themselves to you guys. Conor.
So 30 years experience, live action, and past 5-6 years animation. So live action, I did everything from produce documentaries to co-finance feature films with the major studios in the US, and also did large P&A financing with 2 of the studios. So that would have been like a $250 million revolving fund. Came back to Ireland, Hardy Bucks, Mrs. Brown's Boys, sidestepped, took over Giant for a couple of years, who did work with original IP with Apple and Disney, and then service work with DreamWorks, Paramount, and Fox Bento. So I've worked as a sales agent, a financier, but I principally consider myself a producer. So that's my background.
It's also worth saying Conor is on the board of Animation Ireland as well. Conor, just
yeah.
One of your more important roles.
Yes, forgot about that.
Thank you. Over to you, Elaine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elaine Gill. I'm an accountant and a tax advisor. And by chance, nearly by being in the right place at the right time, I specialise in advising the film industry. And by film industry, I generally mean film, television, animation, creative documentary, and mainly around the tax incentive. It's the one section of the Tax Act I think everybody in the creative industries can actually quote. Section 481 is like rolls off your tongue like no other section in the Tax Act. So that's my speciality, and hopefully I can contribute a little bit today to some of questions that you might have around that and the changes.
I'm glad you're so positive about it, Elaine. I think a lot of
Very,
people could think wrong
very
place at the wrong
Ronan.
time, you know. Yeah, I know, fair play. Catherine, over to yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My company's based in New York City. Haven't always had my company, but have for the last 24 years. Before that, I worked for a variety of different international distributors, starting with Los Angeles after I graduated from the American Film Institute, where they emphasize story, script. If it's not in the script, it's not on the screen, so I appreciate the need for good story. And I was shocked when I started in the feature film business, live action in Los Angeles, that the buyers or the local distributors, country by country, would often not read the script. I was shocked. I was like, how could you not read the script? But so I've gone from live action to animation, and that has won my heart and soul because of the talent in the industry and the lack of big Hollywood egos, which I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of those. So it's,
I am
it's
one.
A real okay, on guard. I speak LA too. So it's lovely to be here, and I have always admired the talent that comes from this country, and it's very talent-driven industry. So finance and business is the side, and sales is the side I come from, but we work lockstep with the creatives. So thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Gary Timpson. I'm the managing director of Kavaleer Productions. So I've been in the industry a while. I think I left college in 1886. And ever since then, I've been working in the business. I worked in London for a number of years. Prior to that, I was in the feature studio, Terglyph. People remember that far back. I went to London, worked in Soho in the studios for about 3 years. Went to Australia, worked for Warner Bros. Over there, directing on some of their shorts like Duck Dodgers and For the Proud Family as well. Came back to Ireland in 2004, a few years just before the crash, which is perfect timing for me. Joined Kavaleer, teamed up with Andrew Kavanagh. Where's Andrew? He must be in the room somewhere. And since then, we've been working predominantly on 2D digital preschool, but recently we've moved into the space for the older age group. My role is, I'm exec producer, So I tickle people up for the money, as Ronan would know, for all the sponsors. That's predominantly what I do, along with Geraldine Weber and Leanne Duffy. That's our team. We've 90 crew at the moment. We're working on a large show for a US client at the moment. About 20 of the crew are in-house, and the remainder of the crew are actually remote. We're also setting up in Manchester as well, so we're kind of broadening our space. So that's me.
Great stuff, and it's worth saying again that Gary has been instrumental in, to put it politely, sourcing the sponsorship for
Back rubs.
Yeah, for this year's festival. And I just wanted the sponsors here to have a good look at Gary, because he's going to give you next week off, but he's going to be back on to you the following week for the 2020.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah. for our 2025 event. So we talked at the start there about the uncertainty that exists. So I'm going to kick off at you, Gary, because we had a sort of pre-chat, and Gary mentioned Frankenstein funding, which I have to say intrigued me. So I just want to ask you, like, given that the streamer boom is over, and I think we all accept that, what new sources of finance are available, or what are producers doing differently to get their projects funded?
Yeah, the Frankenstein funding came out, I think it was Miss Elaine Gill kind of coined that phrase years ago, because it's up till the last few years, the streamers were putting in single source funding, and the money was there to some degree. As everybody knows, the last year or so, people are saying survive till 25 now, because the industry's starting to it's kind of reducing in size. So I think a lot of streamers now are looking to co-produce. I think that's one big issue. Like in the past, they would come in, you wouldn't be able to kind of raise. Section 481 was always there, but in terms of Screen Ireland funding or any other funding, it wasn't really available to them, because they'd have to release equity in their product. Studio investment wasn't there, they weren't interested. Now they're looking at all options, because the gap is still there, and we need to kind of still produce the show. So I think a lot of the bigger streamers are looking to partner with studios. And also, back to the Frankenstein funding, studios are now looking to do tripartites. They're trying to look at what tax regions, and there's been a big uplift in different territories with tax credits, and anybody in the industry are constantly getting emails about countries like France and Spain are looking to come in with their own version of their tax credit. So I think it's companies are kind of coming together like a commune and saying, how can we actually produce shows now that the funding is kind of reduced somewhat?
Anybody else want to jump in, or? Yeah.
Well, I think just to add to that in terms of the streamers, the principal problem, I think it's been spoken about, but the principal problem is that Amazon realized about 3 years ago what everyone has realized in the last year, which is that nobody subscribes to an SVOD for kids, with the exception of Disney. And the problem is, kids, although 50% of what goes across Netflix is still children's, the amount of budget that they'll now allocate for that is 2-3%, because that is the rate of slowdown in the churn. So the problem for animation in particular, but for children's in general, is that with the exception of, if you take Netflix and you take out Roald Dahl and you take out what's the other one? I can't remember, the American one, Dr. Seuss. There's actually very, very little left. So they're looking to pick up. I mean, they'll buy, but they'll buy at a cheap rate, and that is a fundamental problem for children's and animation going forward, because it's not as if there's even a rainbow at the end of the journey in terms of financing, unless you create a hit, in which case obviously it is. But that's the old film model. Vegas wouldn't be Vegas without a jackpot. The problem is, if you're trying to run a company, you're really up against, basically throwing dice and hoping. So that's the problem. Disney are the only ones that parents will subscribe to for kids. But the problem Disney have, which they articulate at all their investor meetings, is the problem they have is they can't just be kids anymore. But people don't see them as anything different than kids. So they buy kids, and then, oh, look, there's this other show, but they'll never buy for that other show. So hence the mergers that are about to happen.
Well, it sounds like what Gary was describing there was really just going back to the traditional way of making programs, with the streamers just picking up where.
But with no US sale, that's the problem. In the old days, if you made it, you always had the hope that maybe it could click America. But America's sitting there and saying, well, I'll give you 5% of your budget.
Yeah, and it's the viewing habits of kids, we all know. like, Fortnite, and like 13-year-old, that's what he, comes to see me. It's like iPad instead of dad. It's like that's his. He comes in, he jumps on, and from 7 onwards, they're not watching shows. So the streamers and broadcasters are looking at that now to do shorter form as well. So, we have to look at how do we put funding models again. I would also mention that the traditional 52 by 11, that format, because kids don't naturally sit down and say, I'm going to watch 52 by 11 minute episodes now. They don't. It's not something they do. So it's kind of snippets because they're so used to the scrolling like we all are with the TikTok. It's instant hit. So we have to be kind of cognizant of that and trying to mold our businesses to suit that. So I think that we found in the last year or so that in the past, because distributors would say, I need 52. I need to sell 1 a week. I need to have that. That's not the case anymore. I think they're looking at, can you do less? And actually, in fairness to a lot of the funding bodies in Ireland as well, have been very useful and very kind of progressive on that front as well in terms of content is content. So they'll actually say, well, what can you make for the money? And I've had conversations with other studios in Ireland as well where they've got to that point. I think we mentioned the other day, Ronan, about that last 15%, and you get to a point where you're like, we've got to make it, so let's just partner. And that's where these other studios around Europe are very good at sitting down and saying, well, look, how much money do we have? What funding can we access now? When does the funding actually fall off an edge of a cliff? So we have to make it. So I think the whole world's changing. It's not all doom and gloom. I think people are going to diversify and going to change their habits. It's happened before. We'll get through it. I think it will kind of come around, I think, the latter part of next year, I think.
This isn't as explicit as it sounds, but when we had the conversation the other day, we sort of asked the question, what are you prepared to do for that 15%, wasn't it? In terms of...
I answer that?
Yeah,
no,
that's
please
what I'm
don't.
asking you, yeah, I am asking you, yeah.
We can't say that here.
Well, I think we talked about deferrals and, and what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, I think the deferrals, and that's something that, and myself and Elaine talked about that the other day, it's just that pitfall of a deferral because, and as Andrew would know, we'd have these conversations a lot, is you get to that point where you're going, okay, we need to make this show, but how much, because a deferral is, it's not part of the 41 funding, it's not...
No, the knock-on effect of deferring your fee or producer investments was that phrase that everybody uses where there was perception that you'd get paid, but you just invest it back in again. But the problem with that is when you do that, it impacts your tax credit calculation. And then you've got another shortfall that you have to deal with, so that you end up in this merry-go-round of trying to figure out, well, at what point does this add up and balance again? So it's always a tough conversation, that part.
Yeah, and it's also dimension as well, deferrals, and we've been through that with Elaine as well, that if you defer, right, and then if you have to put more money in, it's a producer's investment. So that comes off the top of the 41 as well, Elaine, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, yeah. And the other part I notice with those things is when people would say they defer and then say there's an excess of tax credit at the end. So for some reason we've underestimated the tax credit and so we've got a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily mean that immediately pays off your deferral unless you've agreed that with your other financiers up front. So that's a really important part when you're looking at deferrals and doing is making sure if you were conservative in your tax credit calculation, which we're all trying to be, because now if you overclaim, revenue are charging you interest, and if you overestimate it, there's a shortfall on the tax credit calculation, financing at the end, well, who doesn't get paid? Well, the producer doesn't get paid because you're the only person left. And that's what happens. So people become more conservative. So it means that sometimes we're landing with slightly higher tax credit at the end. But it's really important to negotiate when you make a deferral to make the project with the financiers that deferral can be covered by XX tax credit. Otherwise, it goes back into a waterfall, which is shared by everybody, so you don't even benefit from that. So those are kind of key things to try and build into those situations.
I think as well, if I just say, like in terms of deferrals where you're producing your own IP, the big problem always is that you're really relying on the next show to pay you for this show. And when something goes wrong, and with another hat on, I deal with a lot of problems. When things do go wrong, you're really fucked. I mean, like studio, personally, every way. Sorry, or beep, sorry. But like for...
Children's television.
Indeed, yes. But
He meant to say screwed.
It's the late night version. But,
We're not even past the yard arm.
I get confused. But like it's a serious problem, and it can bring studios down, and it can really mess up people's lives for years. But there's always that balance between, like, we've got to make the program because you believe in it, but also if you don't have your funding. I do think going forward, particularly with the streamers kind of withdrawing out of the market for the time being, there's going to be mergers across in the States in the next couple of years, and then there'll be some sort of baseline back. But there's a fundamental problem. It's the same in the UK, it's the same in Ireland, it's less so in, say, France, which is that I don't believe, even if you have a mainstream broadcaster, if you've got the BBC funding you still have a gap. Now, that never used to happen, but it's happening now. So it's how you can try and close that gap without putting yourself at the level of risk, where when it goes wrong, it really goes terribly wrong. And it's to try and find a model that can accommodate that going forward, because every company in this room and across the UK is facing the same problem. UK traditionally has off-balance sheet MG financiers that can plug that gap for you. We don't have it in Ireland, it's never existed. It's limited in the UK. So that is something that we've got to try and work out here going forward, is how we can do that.
Yeah, so we're looking at that as evolving from sales agents to also working in executive production and putting teams of talent and financing packages together so that you could reach a green light without that. And one of the ways that we're going about it is to, the simple concept is to begin with the end in mind. And the end in mind is this gap. So who could be our strategic partner who actually, a rarity, but there's a few out there, we hope, that have funding, they actually have equity. So you have to give up to get that assurance or reassurance. And when you do the green light, that you're not having to be forced to be in this precarious, terrible, potentially awful situation is, so for example, in Annecy coming up, and I think this kind of revolves and crosses over creative as well as business, is trust and the relationships. And so I'm meeting with people that I've known for 10 to 13 years, which isn't that long, but it is long enough to say, right, we've done different things together, but now you have a fund. Now you have equity, the ability to equity finance, and you're a studio. But so the key question for the producer, the Canadian, in one case, the Canadian producer I'm working with, he said, but is it, I don't want to work with a studio, and he wasn't putting down India, he was saying any studio anywhere in the world, if it's going to be this formula of deferrals and that's how they reach their contribution. I said, no, I know what you're saying. We want real cash that can be spent anywhere and not in the home territory. That can actually, so now the reverse is, what would that potential partner be looking at? And for in your content is like, they really want a huge return on their investment, and it really has to be compelling in the marketplace. So knowing what the marketplace, all these ebbs and flows and changes in the marketplace, and what's going to have that hit potential, and to cross over further is that then go after venture capital potentially as part of the new model, which is, I think that's something you've done, right?
Remarkably, venture capital is cheaper than most MG deferrals in the market, and that's shocking, actually. But yeah, the thing about it is what drives that then, if somebody's going to come in and say, well, I'll cover that 15 or 20% gap, but there's no point in me doing that unless I also load in another 20, 30% in order to then drive the marketing of that and to open markets and actually have toys and stock shelves, which is at the base of a lot of animation. The thing in an Irish context that I found over the years is very seldom do you find an ambition to fill a shelf. It's I want to make a show and not I want to fill a shelf. And the thing about it is they go hand in hand. Yeah. We've never had an organic hit out of Ireland. And you kind of need, if you're going to grow as an industry, you kind of need it, because the people whoever it is who has that hit now has the money to reinvest the gap in other people's productions. Canada has managed it in a way that we've just not. And I do think that current changes because of the streamers and because of the over-reliance on them for the past 5-7 years, means that people really in Ireland, you know, we've got to work it out. We've really got to work out how we're going to go forward. Otherwise, you're just a service studio or a studio who will at some point fail, because there will be some production will collapse.
Yeah, I think just on deferments, it's kind of important to mention that there's kind of two types of deferments. The deferment into the ether, the never ever. You know, that these are the ones that scare me, because you really
Never ever.
they're never ever. And we, like on one of our shows, Boy Girl Dog Cat Mouse Cheese, I keep saying it, so just call it Boy Girl. We on our first season, for example, we went for media funding, so we were willing, and it came after the fact, after we closed. So that was a deferment, an educated deferment, in the deferment we knew we were going to get back. So, you know, we're willing to do that, because at a certain point during production or shortly afterwards, you were going to get your money back. But then on the other hand, on our own IP, sometimes you defer, and it is to never, never, because the natural sequence of events for any production is that it's 18 to 20 months to make the show, and then they have to have product to sell, distributor, and also then you have to remember that if they're putting up an MG, they come out first, plus their 30%, plus the 5% fees. Then it's the next equity partner in line, which is traditionally Screen Ireland, and you know, if it's an investor putting in. So you're basically, you know, you're a long way down the line, you know, to get your deferment back. So it's very important, so that when you step into that deferment room and you make that decision as a business, you have to remember it's 3 to 4 years or never. You know, these are the kind,
Can I bring you back there, Catherine? You mentioned about strategic partners, and just, you know, for people in the room, are those strategic partners people with existing inventory or property, or how would that work, just in relation to making programs?
Right. Well, I find that most people, when you say you're looking for a strategic partner, it means that you have your IP that you want to find. So the trouble is, the problem with a strategic partner is they're hard to find, because they have their own IP that they want to get funded. So it's like a whole bunch of possibilities with everyone. So there's this term used some time ago in the feature film finance, which I started with ages ago, called twinning. And I thought, well, maybe that's what one of the things we should do now in the children's series business is I'll do you. Let me see your slate of 5 or 6, you know, series. Yeah. I've got like 3 or 4, and then maybe we'll do yours and mine, because the problem is that it's everybody's creative and isn't passionate about their own. So as one of the qualities of a strategic partner would be that they're as passionate and that they come on board with that vision, business and creative passion that you have for your own. So that's a number one trait. But 2, that they're motivated to help you achieve your vision, and then in reverse. So I'm thinking that the best strategic partner would be not just someone who can help you with the finance, but who can help you creatively, so that you actually organically will make something that has the energy and focus to get to the finish line. Because even with 2 partners, it doesn't mean you have financing now. You need 3 or 4 maybe.
No, you've just got a second overhead.
Oh, that's true. Well, they have to pay for their own, and you pay for your own.
But certainly, I think the analogy with like feature film financing back in the 90s is very apt. And like the way the market has gone, that's what it is. And it's about building slates, and it's about building models of distribution and cooperation to get it done. It's exactly the same. It's remarkable how nothing changes. You just got to wait for it to come back around.
Or plus ça change, as Delphine would say.
Indeed.
But can I keep it sort of reasonably high level for another little while? And we threw out venture capitalists, or VCs were mentioned, but we didn't sort of delve into that. And the way we describe our industry, you'd wonder why they would get involved. But if you're getting a VC involved with you, is that with your project or with your company?
Oh, it's generally with your company, although you can make it specific to your project. But the reason venture capital are suddenly looking at it, and you can see BlackRock went into Anton just recently, and they've had success with Paddington. But actually, that's the one that gets the headline. In fact, most of their investments are much smaller and project-led, and they've been quite successful in it. The thing about it is, like, so I was chatting to DreamWorks at Kidscreen, and they were saying, because I was trying to talk to them about GoPros going back a bit, and they were like, we're DreamWorks, we don't do GoPros. They do now. But what they were saying was, you know, you jump back to when I first had that conversation, they had 52 shows in production. At Kidscreen, they had 25, and by the summer, the end of the summer, they will have 12 in production, only 3 of which are new and 1 of which is low budget. So the thing about it is there is a massive contraction happening, and in a sense, we've been quite lucky in Ireland in that we've been relatively small, so we've kind of managed to stay under the radar. But if you're a venture capital fund, you're looking and say, well, hold on a moment. The amount of programs being produced is now down to about a third or 25% of what was being produced 2 years ago, which means in 2 or 3 years from now, prices are going to go up. There's an opportunity. And that's why they're looking at it.
And if you bring in a VC, how do they get paid, or how do they get return?
I'm not able to say that in the room because of the yard arm, apparently. But it's
isn't
painful.
that the huge difference, though, Ronan? I mean, the difference between, like, if venture capital comes into your company, they own part of your company now. That's really different to somebody investing in a project and taking a punt on a project.
Well, that's why you
It's
do
a
slates.
hugely
If you can do
different-
slates effectively, they go into the
I
slate.
still think they look for ownership, though, don't they? Like, in my experience, they've looked
Only
for
if you
ownership.
fail.
Many
I
of
think
those
they
Only if
owners
you
are
fail.
it's
really-
a minimum
yeah,
like 49% or something, you know, up to 30-40%.
It's-
No,
it's
they
a
don't. They
big
take
decision.
over if you fail, but they're quite happy to let you. Venture doesn't want to own you; it just wants the money.
And just in layperson's terms, like, when you say slate, what do you mean by that, if the VC comes in?
The twinning idea, or creating a pot, where you take a couple of different companies and you put them into a pot together, so that you're not trying to leverage off
Sorry,
one
a couple of
project.
different projects, is it, into one
Yes,
pot?
you use six in traditionally feature film. It's six or 10, and that you really, really believe that you've already got interest or you've got base funding on. Then you put them in, so you aggregate out the potential upside and downside and that. Because the problem is, if you do one and it doesn't work, you're done. Whereas if you can take 6, you have 5 other bites at the cherry to get it right. Because when you get it right, you tend to get it right spectacularly.
It's a big decision for a company because you're losing so much control. You're losing, like as you said, if it goes wrong.
Well, I suppose that's the thing, is about, like, do you stay at the level you're at, or do you want to take a risk in terms of the industry and stretch your wings?
Well, it's
and
also
make
the
more
closing.
bigger shows.
You know, and it's becoming more kind of important now because of the gap, as you mentioned.
Well, that's the thing, is that's why the venture capital funds are sniffing, because, like, the gap, like I've a show with a company in this room, 2 state broadcasters, and it has gap funding. So, like, that's the problem. It's like where everybody is stuck with a gap at the moment. Traditionally, I mean, the Barclays and Coutts, who in the UK context were the ones, they set up a company called Films, based in Guernsey. Jorge Gallegos ran it, a wonderful man, and he. But exactly this problem happened in the late '80s, early '90s in the UK, and that's how they got round it. So they only took a lean on the projects, but you had to go in with a slate of 6, and because then they could say, okay, well, if we can work it out how to do it.
And your partners needed to be pun intended, bankable. These are bankers.
It's one word.
The other similarity that I see going on across the board, so not just with projects I'm involved with, but in the industry, children's is becoming more and more like the movie business in terms of the packaging or the elements of talent. And it doesn't mean the creative talent that's making this show. It means, like, well, Paul McCartney's doing our theme song, and so on, like star names that come from Hollywood or are famous outside of Hollywood, but made famous by Hollywood. But there's a lot of that sort of talent, star talent that they're now looking for, and that actually helps with venture capitalists too.
It does, and it's driven by, I mean, it's why hardly any original programs are being made at the moment. And that is going to stay for the next couple of years. It's just the nature of it. Because, the way the streamers look at it, or the TV shows, is nobody has any time anymore to think about the show. So it has to be an identifiable name.
It's taking the risk. I mean, you see streamers reboot.
I don't actually think it takes the risk away, but it
No,
takes
no,
the
but
risk away from the executive being able to get it through.
Yeah.
It doesn't take the risk away from the program.
No, it doesn't. But I think they're kind of risk averse in terms. That's why the reboots are so.
Yeah, totally.
prevalent
Everything is a
now, you know.
reboot. Yeah. In fact, I'm trawling through the library of a studio at the moment, going through what do we think has a name that's big enough.
Yeah, well, I'm negotiating to do season 3 of something, but I was not really involved in season 1 or 2, but I'm like, I think it's current. It needs to be relevant for kids and parents today too. I mean, everybody talks about it. We don't need to say the name Bluey, but Bluey, Peppa Pig, and so on. So how do you entice these? You let them know that here's the model, and they start just like the sexy actor or actresses, that they get stars in their eyes about. This is the new hit model, and even just Cannes Film Festival, they're talking about in the trades. I didn't happen to go to Cannes this year, but in the trades about how animated features are getting a lot more attention. So the industry is always looking for something new, but we're looking for solving the problem so we can make the something new that's going to work. And the financing models, we're in a huge shift right now, and a reboot, I would call it.
Yeah. I think you mentioned gap there, Conor. I think that's the one word that scares me the most. I think is that if you're taking that gap funding and sales don't come in, you really are
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble.
That's why on the tube they remind you every day, mind the gap. Just in case.
Were you practicing that all night?
No, I live in it.
Well, I wouldn't criticise reboots too much because some of us wouldn't be on the stage here if you weren't able to reboot. So I think that's sometimes a positive thing. Can I just bring you back, Gary, to where you mentioned about packaging projects, maybe doing 5 or 6 as a slate, getting a VC in, and you said you lose control. So how does that manifest itself in your day-to-day business, that loss of control?
Well, it's something we haven't done, but in terms of packaging the projects, I think, and I've colleagues of mine who have done it, close colleagues, and they do lose control. It's very exciting. Somebody come in and say they're going to give you this large portion of money and over a set period of year, but it has there's a time on it, and they want to see it return. And it's a scattergun approach really for them because, as Conor kind of alluded to, they're betting on a few horses, and they're one like a Bluey, that would be amazing. But if they all fail, then it's an issue. But they will take some ownership of your company, and you won't have control. And that's the scary.
And is that like reporting?
It's everything.
Did it sit on your board?
They'll have
how does that work?
They have a control over your company because they're putting in the large to produce 3 or 4 shows or to develop 3 or 4 shows over a number of years. It's a substantial amount of money. So they're not going to come in and just give you that. They're going to have some end game, and they're looking at it from a perspective. We see it as projects, ideas, stuff we want to make. They see it as properties. It's a return. It's money. They've got a board to report to. It's probably part of a massive pension fund that they have to return on. So you have to see it from their perspective and be very conscious of how they see your studio.
So does that mean that they would have oversight of your budgets? Would they input into your budgets? Would they control those budgets? How does that work?
Well, it'd be full disclosure on everything, every move you make. You'd have some control in terms of, because you're the studio, you're the creative, you're the experts in your division. But in terms of the financing, the spending, they would have a say on that. And that's my understanding of it, that they would have an input. So it is a big decision to make as a company, something that Kavaleer hasn't undertaken just yet. But we have taken gap, as I mentioned earlier, and it's something that it can really affect your day-to-day business.
Yeah, it's tremendously expensive. The Colombian drug lords who charge you less interest. When you actually work it out, you think,
We've gone from PG back up
no,
to 18 again. So,
I can see your hand.
Conor, take money from anyone.
Whoever thought the finance panel would be rated R, huh?
I just think of some of the gap financiers I've got money from called Colombian drug lords. So, there's nobody in the room, is there? So it's being recorded, isn't it?
We mentioned earlier on there about co-producing and how Irish, companies do that and have a long track record of that. Can I ask you, Catherine, as our international person here, can you give us some perspective on why you would or you wouldn't co-produce with Ireland?
I absolutely would, and there's many, many reasons why, but one of the reasons not yet said is because you're uniquely positioned in terms of your EU status. Your native language, most everybody's native language here is English. You also speak dialects, but other dialects and other languages. But English is the business language of a lot of countries, and but the first language of France is not English, even though so many people speak English fairly fluently. But really, for the understanding and so the benefit of EU status is that there's still quotas in Europe that the broadcasters and channels have to meet, and even some of their legislation, they're trying to get some of the SVODs and AVODs to also be regulated like the broadcasters have been for years and years and years. And the whole quota system is, if it's EU content, the possibility for sales is greatly increased, because the pool of what qualifies as EU content is not like the whole rest of the world. Like even American-made Hollywood studio product, if it's not EU status, a lot of it doesn't sell into Europe because they must meet their quotas. And so there's a huge advantage to having an Irish partner who then, if you have a three-way co-production and 2 out of the 3 partners are from the EU, and there's co-production treaties and status so you can qualify for those quotas, and then your show has a much greater chance of selling into a good chunk of the market.
I think as well with the UK, because currently the UK still qualifies as Europe, but the French are on a warpath and they're basically kicking the Brits out of what will now be EU as compared to the European Co-Production Convention. So some feature films will still qualify, but television is absolutely going to be kicked out. And the UK, the 40%, the preemptive as part of the media rights bill that they're now going to pass before Parliament is finally dissolved. They're doing that because they're anticipating getting knocked out by the French, and they're trying to steal a march on it. So you'll get more here. Now, it's only for feature film at the moment, but they'll probably expand that. So that shows you the level. Like Britain gets $6 billion a year, basically from the US, in what is basically direct foreign investment for media, and the French have had their eyes on that for some time.
It's funny to bring up that tax credit and gap in the same conversation. I met a couple of people in Cannes last weekend from the UK, and they said the increase in the tax credit overnight filled the gap in a number of projects they had. So, it's already had, even though it's not even legislated for, and we have a change of government, and we hope the new government will bring it in, whatever they're going to do. Well, if you were from the UK, you would. And certainly the anticipation is that they will. And I believe that people are already counting it into their budgets, into their finance plans. And I was told by Discounter that they were already discounting the tax credit, even though it's not in legislation.
They would do that, but the problem always is you jump to 40 overnight. There's a pent-up price demand in the UK, so you're going to get 12 honeymoon months, at the end of which you're going to have industrial relations problems with people saying, I want more. It's been bubbling for years in the UK, and it will explode on that. So careful what you wish for as well, because it's going to open that can of worms.
I think we do wish for it, though.
In an Irish context?
I think we do wish for it, don't we? Do we all wish for it?
I was going to say, yeah. Well, would this be a good time to put up your slide, Elaine? Yeah. Can we put up the slide there, lads? Yeah.
Because it just shows you.
Just before you start, Elaine, I just want to let you know, Kate O'Connor, where's Kate? Yeah, Kate O'Connor from Animation UK is here, so get that woman a microphone, because we'll put Kate on the spot as well. Yeah. So if you want to talk us through there, Elaine, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, it just gives you an idea. Sorry, I don't want to stand up really, but just move out of the way. It just gives you an idea of the current situation, and I just used the animation credit existing. It gives roughly 29% compared to our 32. But as soon as you move into independent film, it's 39.8 compared to our 32. Like immediately, we're at a competitive disadvantage. Now they bring in a headline rate of 53, so nobody get carried away with 53. That's all done mainly for Pillar 2. I'm not going to get into the big OECD complications of bigger companies in the UK, but that's brought in for Pillar 2 purposes. That's why it's 53. But this is the figure. This is what you want to compare, 39 to 32. And that's where we are today, today, effectively, even though it won't be in existence till probably April 2025, I think. And obviously visual effects industry have the same problem because there's a new visual effects credit coming in as well that's going to have a similar impact, not as high. But I mean, you are talking about a big jump in competitiveness from there to here. So,
And is that the same for animation as well? It's just cost for VFX animation?
well, this is
Film,
so
film
television.
feature, yeah.
If it's feature animation, that's
Yeah,
going to happen.
feature, yeah.
So if it's television, you're still at a competitive advantage. But features has a problem, and that's until they change and
But
decide
only
to
up
bring
to
it in
15
for
million
television as well.
budgets.
Yeah, the cap is 15 million sterling global budget, and the
I
tax
was going to say,
credit
is that a
given-
global budget?
It's global budget,
actually
15 million.
You can only claim it on 80%
Yeah, that's
of
what
the
the,
50.
the calculation is doing that for you. It's 80% of your core, but that would be the same if it was here. It's always going to be 80%. So
I
it's
think
the same
Ireland is,
impact.
right, yeah, just on your question, Ronan, on Ireland's position and why studios and broadcasters will come to Ireland. I think we're in still a very good position because of, with Screen Ireland's increased man production funding now recently, and the tax credit's still incredibly strong. The talent in Ireland, the experience of doing co-productions. There's because a lot of studios, and Catherine, you probably know about this, they're coming to Ireland, you come for the experience as well. Just come for a safe pair of hands in terms of, what the studio you're going to can actually deliver. So I think we bring a lot to the table still, even with the increase of the UK tax credit.
You're not getting away with it, Kate. You probably thought I'd forgotten about you, but just in relation to the UK tax credit, like are people making plans already based on that? Has it any real life implications that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean the change to the tax relief, which is now changed to this more grant-based system, so it's taxed, which is why you get these eye-catching figures of 39% announced last March, I think, in the budget in 23. The headline figure announced was 39%, and everyone went, what the hell is the UK doing? But in fact, it is the 29.25% because it's taxed at the corporation tax. It's very complicated. But the big announcement, and yes, that came into it, that's been through legislation. It was unique to animation. We made a huge case in the UK for animation to get that uplifted tax relief. Live action drama didn't, and film didn't, but we did, and children's did. And then that came into effect on the 1st of January, done and dusted. It's in the system, it's in people's budgets, it's happening. And then this March, the big announcement came around the 53%, really 40% net, for features under 15 million. Mainly that was driven by the live action indie movie sector, but obviously animation is really benefiting. It was announced during Cartoon Movie. It closed the gap for a number of projects during that week in March that it was announced. I 100% agree with all the issues about be careful what you wish for, what are the implications, and where are we going with this. And also, to be honest, we do have an election looming now. But whether this survives the new government is probably the least of our concerns about what happens in the UK with a new government. I say that as the representative of the animation industry. We're very much hoping for a new government, and they're very supportive of the animation industry. We're already talking to the shadow team, and they understand the complexities of the finance system, and they understand what they might need to do to help support us further. But there are issues, for sure. And some of the issues you were talking about earlier, about the lack of investment from our public PSBs, 80% decline over the last 15 years. There's very little public funding. We don't access European funding. We are still part of the quotas. The French will not drive us out, I don't think, but we'll have that conversation over lunch. And let's be bullish about this. We, Animation UK, are thrilled to be here and friends of Animation Ireland and still very involved in Europe. And I could go on, but that's the situation. There's a lot of optimism in the UK, but we also understand some of the implications of that most recent budget announcement.
Thanks very much for that, Kate. It's worth saying, just to Elaine's point, I know you were trying to say it there, Elaine, when you were standing up, you were saying about the 40%. So there's certainly a push. Animation Ireland was at the Oireachtas committee on media during the week, and we were pushing for some sort of a regional support. and we're pushing for that to be at 40%, and we feel there may be an appetite to bring that in countrywide, which, you know, it looks like it might be for the whole country. But watch this space. As I say, we're out there lobbying on the industry's behalf all the time.
And just to add to Ronan's comment there, when lobbying the government here, we are talking about television as well as feature film. That's what we're asking for. So we're asking for feature film to be included in an uplifted tax credit. There will be, or I would anticipate that they would look at a budget ceiling like they have done in the UK. So I don't think the big projects would benefit if we did get an increase, because I think they'll try and take a regional box, an Irish creative box, as well as the competitive box. We don't like to be seen to be following the UK. That's really important from a government perspective, that we don't follow, but we do like to mind what we have.
Yeah, I think in terms of that as well, like part of the conversation with the government is trying to turn the focus less into service-driven in terms of an increase and more into original IP ownership or shared ownership, so that there's a value that stays behind when the show goes. Eaten bread is soon forgotten, as a revenue person once said to me after an audit many years ago. But the thing about it is service, you know, comes and goes quickly. You need to leave long-term benefit in the country. So if we do go from 32 to 40, it should be on the basis that there's a retained ownership and long-term revenue stream. You know, you still got to make a show that makes a long-term revenue stream, but if you do it, that you actually get it. And that closes the gap.
Yeah, that's your ideal. But obviously, as well, there's the making of the shows, and there's the employment, and there's the training, and there's the every good stuff that comes with just having a tax credit that's well and competitive. Yeah.
And given the complexity of you know, Elaine's slide and what Kate was talking about, and bringing in the 40% and you know, talking about venture capital and reporting, do you think we have the in-house expertise to deal with that, or do we need to, you know, from a financial point of view? Because again, everybody loves the creative side, but on the finance side,
We have Elaine.
Yeah, I know.
Can't
But
be in every house now. I think you need to. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. I think, it's a very good question, because I think you know, I do refer to Elaine after every time we put a budget together and make sure the tax credit's right, because it is this, if you get that wrong, you know, you're in a world of pain. So I think, but the expertise, that's something that, and I know there's so much training in the plans, and you've been part of many of them, and they're just so good, but a lot of them could steer towards, and I think there's one coming up now on the legal side of 481. It's so important to have that, because
lunch and learn, it's called.
Lunch and learn, yeah.
And the finance side, I find within companies, we need people who do finance and legal. We really, really do. And the more complicated or Frankenstein your finance plan becomes, the more important it is to have in-house people who have a good general knowledge of what they're doing.
Yeah,
you always need professional advisors at the end of the day, of course. But
it's also the stress.
Of course. Someone like...
I think it's also when it's basically when you get your finance in place and you stretch it across on the finance plan, as Elaine knows, it really shows up all the warts and all. And if you're sitting with your partner, and this is actually a very important point, if the partner you decide to go with is like looking at it and thinks it's hieroglyphics and has no idea, you get worried, because you're in it together. You know, you're taking the risk together. So I think there's definitely scope there for training in that regard, particularly around the 481, applying for 481. You know, it's not that scary if you know what you're doing. It's not, but people get so caught up on it, because it's a substantial amount of money, and there is clawback provisions.
Well, there is this really important, there is that personal liability attached to our tax credit that's unique. So, you know, when you're doing it, that's why it's so important that people who understand it and, you know, calculate it properly. Because if you overcalculate, firstly, if you overclaim on your first instalment, now Revenue are automatically charging interest on the overclaim of first instalment. It's an automatic thing now. And then, obviously, as we said at the beginning, if you overestimate your tax credit and there's a shortfall at the end, the person who doesn't get paid is the producer. And it's difficult. And if there's a mistake and something's inherently wrong, or there's an issue and you have a revenue audit and it's wrong, the clawback comes personally back to the shareholders and directors of the producer company. And that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah, and you live with it for years, potentially, and it's so important. So that, you know, again, when you're partnering with somebody, is that they're aware of this, you know, and that
appreciate it. And particularly as well in international partners or financiers and bankers who are banking the tax credit, that they understand the liability or the potential liability that you carry with you to the project.
Yeah, not
So
that they care.
No, but even, at least if they know, it might make a difference.
One thing I would say about the bank, like up there, and Conor, you might have something to say on this, but in terms of the banks in Ireland, I've seen that they're starting to engage a bit more about trying to understand how it works, you know, because every time you're going to explain your business, it's like Dragon's Den. They're like looking at you going, what? You know, you're going to pitch
And
the
you
show.
have a gap?
Yeah,
What's
exactly,
that?
yeah. I'm going to go to a market.
You don't get paid?
Yeah, I'm going to go to market for 7 years and pitch it, and then hopefully get some money. But you're putting your show together, like when you have all your funding together, it's the banks understanding the cash flow in particular, and how the money's going to come in, and where the money goes through the DAC and through Kavaleer and or through the company. So it's just explaining that.
So that all feels a little bit ad hoc at the moment in Ireland, right? There's no one bank.
There's no bank. Ever since the collapse 20 years ago, no bank has ever really come in. You can be lucky and get a manager, and I know Cartoon Saloon have a manager, but as I always say to Jerry, one day you'll go in and he'll be gone, and the next person will look at you blankly going, what's that? You know. So it is a real problem. Kofi have moved in, but Kofi can only do cash flow. Kofi Cine can do investment or can carry, but Kofi Lazier can only do cash flow. But it has certainly woken up some of the banks here to like, oh, there's a business. Who are these French guys coming in, doing this work, writing this paper?
I would always, you know, I know Kofi can be expensive, but when you've got a fully cash flow production and you know what you're getting every month for 20 months, you know, it is, you know, it's peace of mind. It is expensive, but the other method of trying to produce a show by relying on milestones, you miss a milestone.
Oh my God, it's a killer.
Yeah,
And somebody in, no offense, but somebody in a state funding organization goes on holidays and doesn't tell you. And you're like, what do I do? I've got all these people who've got to be paid. And
Yeah, and
like,
I've
there's,
had instances
you know,
where it's like you're talking to a partner, and it is, you know, it is, if it's set up properly, it can run, like the Boy Girl, we were producing it for 7 years, and it ran well because we set it up properly. We fell over a few times, made a few mistakes, but once it hit its scallop, it was fine. But like I've pitched to other producers and said, look, we need to get a cash flow facility in here. The budget's too large. The gap, a lot of money's at the end. Like, oh no, we'll be fine. We'll produce it at this point. And it's like they're busking for their money when they get 8 months in, you know. So it's something you should never do.
We negotiated, just to your point, Elaine, the 90%, the overclaim. We actually negotiated that to have a 10% at the end, which was when we were doing that with the revenue, we were saying it is the only way that a producer in Ireland can be absolutely sure that they'll get some money out of the production. That last percentage at the end would be held back, generally left off the financing plan, in the sense that it comes so late after the finish of the program, or should come so late after the finish of the program, that the producer basically kind of ring fences that and says, whatever else happens, I guess the 3%, at least I'm guaranteed that if everything else goes wrong.
I know that Commissioner and the man are in the room. I'm not going to put you on the spot or point you out, but I know there's talk about the possibility of a content levy coming in towards the end of the year, which would be another way of funding your program. So if you want to say anything about it, if you just grab a mic and make yourself known, that'd be great. Anyone who knows me knows I get a little bit twitchy, so I'm on the move, okay? We're going to do some, we're going to do some questions now, okay? So follow spot, lads, follow spot. So we're going to do some questions. We've got about 5 minutes, so does anyone have any questions? And we have a couple of mics in the room. Anyone have any questions? This is a brilliant panel, guys. Don't waste it. Don't waste the opportunity. Anyone got any questions?
But obviously we have our Sound and Vision funding scheme as well, and just to let people know, for funding rounds and closing dates, they're available on our website, so there are opportunities there for funding. In terms of the content levy, I think it's still being researched at the moment.
Okay.
So the team will feed back to the Minister on that.
And I know you have fast-tracked that. You said you would, and you've been doing that, but I was just wondering if there was any update. That's
yeah,
all.
and
Yeah.
look, I'd love to give you one, but at the moment there isn't. But it probably wouldn't be myself who'd be talking about it in any case.
Okay, no
I didn't
problem.
want to be silent and just
No, and I didn't want to put you on the spot either. Yeah.
what was happening.
Yeah.
But look, in terms of funding rounds, just to let people know, obviously animation is something that wouldn't be, when we get a funding rounds coming into Sound and Vision, a lot of them are documentary. Animation is kind of few and far between. So it's lovely to see animation projects come in there. So check out the website.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Anybody else? Anyone else got a question? Oh, Kerry, how you doing? This is Kerry Michelle O'Brien from Northern Ireland Screen. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Forgive my British sort of naivety and joy. But
effectively, you're talking about slating, okay? And I work with the sort of games and immersive sector over in Northern Screen. I'm trying to look at the sort of cross-section between, the fact that your SVOD model has fallen apart. We're addressing and seeing what the youth are doing with TikTok and other platforms. When you're putting together a slate, do you look at cross-sector IP exploitation at all?
Some companies do, some don't. So to say to you with the show that we're doing with a national UK broadcaster, so what we're doing is we're clipping the amount of episodes. So to go to Gary, 5211 comes from the day of linear television. It's a season, and that's how television used to work. So we're clipping the episodes in order to, unfortunately, not getting the extra money, because what we're doing is creating all additional content to go on TikTok, to go on different platforms, and to complement the program rather than being parts of the program. So characters discussing the program, in the program, about the program. So it becomes this kind of meta, talking to itself world in order to create. But it's there, but it's still very early days. But it's going to come. I mean, it has to come.
I agree. It's one of the things that I'm trying to do is get people to think about cross-sector IP exploitation.
So the Roblox stuff, because when Roblox is top down, it doesn't tend to work as well as when it feels organic. And the kids, are very good at, to go back to the sniff test earlier, they're very good at sniffing out the difference between a brand kind of leaning down into Roblox as compared to a show coming out of it, and kind of organically. So the other huge change that IP has got to deal with is the fact that kids want in. There's a generation who want to be able to interactively play with the characters of the shows they love in a way that traditionally was limited to Comic-Con. And even Comic-Con had problems when it started to do with the studio saying, I don't want people in costumes walking around. Now they embrace it. That is going to happen more and more. It's going to happen digitally. And that's just the world we're going to live in. And IP owners like Disney are freaked about it, because they're going to have to hand over the reins of a lot of IP to third parties.
No, I understand, but it's one of the things that, fortunately in the North, I've been given the opportunity to look and actually try and find and fund development and prototyping for this kind of thing. So I was just wondering what your views were on, if you would engage with someone like me.
Absolutely.
I think I've worked with Northern Screen on Pablo and Lifeboat Luke a number of years ago. And the ratio of spend in terms of development and on production, it's like 5 to 1 or 6 to 1. Does that work from a development side as well?
If I'm prototyping, it can be lower, but I can't talk to numbers in a public room.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can be lower.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
In prototyping, not in production.
Thanks for that, Kerry. And it's also worth reiterating that Animation Ireland is a 32-county organisation as well. So we have studios represented from all across the island. So hence the UK tax credit was quite an interest to us as well. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah, we got one here. Yeah, can you identify yourself, please, Suzanne Kelly from RTE?
Hi, everybody. Suzanne Kelly from RTE. Elaine, it's so great to see you in real life. I feel like I know you very well. First thing I want to say is that obviously I'm keen to get as much money as I can from my bosses and from the government to support children's content. So I urge you all to lobby to increase the spend that RTE has. But my question is, in terms of this kind of Frankenstein funding model, how do you think it might impact on rights and kind of moving away from kind of more protectionist policies in terms of rights for your content?
Yeah, I think this Frankenstein funding is going to
It's taken on a life of its own.
It's going to follow me around forever. So I think it is. It's a very good question, Suzanne. I think it is. You have to relinquish rights. You have to, and it's like if it's your own IP, you will always retain the underlying rights, but the rights in the property you're building, it'll just based on whatever funding you bring. But if it's a co-development, then it changes. It depends when they come in. But a lot of projects we would bring to yourself would be already more or less fully developed. But I think just what's happening in the industry now, people are going to come together a lot sooner. And I know that from Screen Ireland's standpoint as well, Creative Futures has been very useful in terms of helping companies build up a slate. But it's expensive. It takes a long time, so you need to partner. I know Creative Europe do the same as well. So again, it's a great question because it's part of what's happening, and the people are going to have to come together, and the rights will be divided. So you effectively, 2 studios will own a property, and they will exploit the vehicle, which is the series. So I think that's the way it's going.
Thanks very much, Gary. So before we break for lunch, I just want to thank our panel. Thanks to Conor, to Elaine, to Catherine, and to Gary.